for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Welcome to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey again. I'm with you again till 8 o'clock. I'm here in all week, in fact, so you're stuck with me, and we've got a great show planned for you. We're going to discuss Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England governor, who is saying that Britain's growth outlook is the worst he's ever seen. Is he a doom-monger that's talking down the economy? We're also going to be joined by Nimrod Palmach, who's an Israeli hero who saved hundreds of lives on October the 7th after leaving a goodbye message to his own children. And we head back to the Gold Coast to get the jungle latest from Ben Leo as questions are raised over Nigel's airtime. All of this and much, much more to come after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Camilla, thank you, and good evening to you. We begin this bulletin with some breaking news. We can tell you 12 more Israeli hostages have now, this evening, been released from Gaza. We've had word from Israel Defense Forces, which says 10 Israelis and 2 foreign nationals are now on their way home to their families, of course, after medical checks. The exchange is part of the commitment to a 5th-day pause in fighting, a humanitarian truce, if you will, with the Hamas terror group. We're also hearing that in exchange, 30 Palestinian prisoners will be released tonight as well, taking the form pretty much of what happened last night. And this comes as the United States slightly changed its approach today, asked Israel to take greater care in any future strikes on Gaza, a shift to their approach at the White House, saying civilians and vital infrastructure must be protected. But surely the headline news tonight is that good news, at least for those Israeli families who are waiting for those Israeli hostages to get home. 12 more are on their way back to their families. Now, in news here in the UK, a double murderer who sexually abused more than 100 dead bodies wasn't caught due to serious failings at the hospitals where he worked. An inquiry was found today. David Fuller was employed at the now-closed Kent and Sussex Hospital and the Tunbridge Wells Hospital between 2005 and 2020. The inquiry chairman, Sir Jonathan Michael, said the maintenance worker was able to access the mortuary hundreds of times in just 1 year, going unnoticed and unchecked. And a man has admitted killing 3 people who died in separate attacks in Nottingham earlier this year. Students Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar, both 19, And 65-year-old caretaker Ian Coates died after being stabbed in June. Valdo Calocane, also known as Andam Mendes, denied murder but admitted 3 counts of manslaughter on the basis of his diminished responsibility. Thousands attended vigils for the victims in Nottingham in the wake of those attacks. Schools could be forced to stay open during teachers' strike action under new plans to be introduced by the government. The Education Secretary saying strikes over the last year are some of the most disruptive they've ever been for children. Teaching unions described the plans for minimum service levels as shameful, but Gillian Keegan says it's about achieving a fair balance. And if you're getting stuck into planning Christmas this weekend and tonight, you could get the weather to go with it. The Met Office is predicting snow in parts of the UK as we head into the start of December. A yellow weather warning in place for snow and icy conditions. That'll create hazardous conditions in the northeast of England, Yorkshire and parts of Scotland until late tomorrow morning. And another bit of good news to bring you before I go. All 41 workers who were trapped for 17 days in a collapsed tunnel in India are now safely on the ground. Rescuers pulled the workers one at a time out on stretchers through a pipe just 3 feet wide. The Indian authorities had been supplying the men with oxygen, food and water through a separate channel. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey. Now, with news of yet more releases of hostages, I'm going to bring Nimrod Palmach into the conversation now. He's the reserve commander in the Special Forces Unit of the IDF, and he's the CEO of Israel is NGO, which is an organisation that helps to promote Israel around the world. Now, Nimrod, you've got this astonishing story because on October the 7th, you found out what had happened. You defied an order and raced to Gaza. You ran towards danger. You wanted to help people there who had come under attack by Hamas. You recorded a goodbye video to your 7-year-old. What did you say?
Truly, it was a very tough morning. I didn't know. I had to choose. Am I a concerned dad, a concerned civilian in Israel, or doing my job as a CEO of an advocacy organization, or am I an officer in the reservist? It was a very awful day, and when I made the decision to rush south, I knew I had only 3 minutes of a break when I waited for a friend, and there I recorded a video. Basically, I said goodbye to my kids, that I will always love them, and I will always be with them, and I know that they will be beautiful kids forever. It was a 20-second, no draft, that's it. I had only a few seconds to say goodbye.
But recording it, presuming that if you went into Gaza at that point, that you probably wouldn't come out alive.
So it's not entering Gaza, it's actually to entering the fights on the communities along the border. Yes. I actually accepted death. I knew I am about to die either in a few minutes or hours, but I had only a pistol, realizing there's so many terrorists out there in those communities inside and the cities in the south, and knowing that there is no much help. People are trying to get there, but not able, and I faced death. I have to tell you, it was one of the hardest things I had to do, but I made a decision with a full heart, and I knew that my kids one day will be proud of me for what I've done.
Yes, and then what happened that day? So you arrive there, you meet up with your friend, then what happened?
We went on the highway right outside one of the communities. We were attacked by a bunch of, let's say, 30 Hamas terrorists. I grabbed a weapon from a dead soldier, and I've witnessed a lot of death around me. For a moment there, in between shooting the terrorists, I stopped and I looked aside, and I've seen a second Holocaust right there on the highway, even before I entered Kibbutz Be'eri. I've seen so many dead people, dead bodies, women that were brutally attacked. I've seen young children at the back of a car, and I said to myself, you're in the middle of a Holocaust, what they have done to us here. And I engaged fight. For 3 hours, I was fighting there outside the community, preventing this group of terrorists entering Kibbutz Alumim and doing a massacre over there.
How do you even begin to process that? And I ask that in the context of the release of some of these hostages, particularly the children. There's lots of focus here because she's Israeli-Irish on Emily Hand, and she gets reunited with her father, but she looks broken to me, a mother of 3, These kids look completely lost. You're a grown adult and you're trying to process what you saw.
Yeah.
How are these hostages who have been returned to their families, thank goodness, how are they processing it? Are they getting a lot of help?
Definitely. First of all, they are super surrounded by so many professional people, and they get so much love in Israel, all the hostages that got back. Listen, I think that today you won't find one heart in Israel that is not wounded or bleeding with pain, not even one. And regarding the hostages, you know, I fought inside Kibbutz Be'eri to liberate Be'eri from the atrocities all the way to midnight, even more. And on midnight, when I ran outside, running people under fire, one of them decided to stop. He was crying and emotional and kept stopping, and I kept rushing him out because we are under fire. When we got out, he told me that his father was murdered in the morning. He was trapped in the safe room, and then he said, "I can't believe she is in Gaza." I asked him who, and he showed me a picture of a young girl, she's 16 years old, with Hamas terrorists doing a selfie with her phone.
Yes.
And I realized then for the first time we have actually kids and teenagers in Gaza. I didn't know, of course, the number, but these kids has a long way to recover. Hopefully they will. We'll give them any love that we can.
Now, I know you've done a lot of work with younger people. What are your emotions towards some of the Palestinian children caught up in this?
I feel very, very bad for them. In Israel, we have no issue with Palestinians. I mean, we have issue with Hamas. The reason we are there attacking because Hamas did an atrocities not just against Israel. It's a jihad war against Western society. And I chose a side of values like love, empathy, human rights. And Hamas brought this destruction and death upon his community, not just in Israel. And actually, as a soldier, I can say, and as an officer and reservist, we are moving so slow in Gaza because we are saving life, because we don't aim to harm any innocent lives.
I mean, are you concerned, and I appreciate your role as a reservist in the IDF, are you concerned about this issue of proportionality? I note that today the White House has said that they want the IDF to operate with, quotes, far greater precision in southern Gaza as they did in the north. I mean, that has to be the right advice, doesn't it?
Listen, I know that Israel needs to strike Hamas to a point where Hamas does not exist anymore. Exactly to say how will it go and what is the process we need. We are doing everything in our power not to harm civilians to a point where sometimes we even risk our life, and we understand it. But what Hamas is doing, using children, operating from schools, from clinic areas, from hospitals, he knows exactly what he is doing. He is taking children as body shields and uses them. So that's...
Can I ask you a political question? Because perhaps question marks have been raised about Netanyahu. Is he the right man to broker peace in the Middle East? Maybe people in your position might prefer former opposition leader Benny Gantz. I mean, he was in charge, of course, former chief of defence force. Would he be better placed, or is Netanyahu the person for this?
I know that everywhere in Israel now people are dealing with politics and what will happen on the day after. I know one thing, we need to win this war. And I'm giving any support to the government as long as I can. I know that for a fact, after the war will end, there will be a committee to investigate everything and to make decisions. I will let the professionals do their job. But for now, I give full back to my government to win this fight against evil.
What does winning the war look like to you, though? Because I can completely understand the impetus behind wanting to destroy Hamas.
Yeah.
But what happens next for Gaza? Who governs Gaza? What happens to the West Bank? I mean, I appreciate these are massive questions, Nimrod.
This is big questions. Listen, I know it's tough to defeat an idea, maybe even impossible. We want to eliminate Hamas' threat against Israel and against Palestinian people. That means that Hamas won't have the ability anymore to threat, to harm innocent people, both in Gaza, in Palestine, and in Israel. That's what we want to achieve. Secondly, we want to make sure that people can live in safe places in Israel without being threatened. You know, they didn't just kill us over there. They brutally attacked women, sexually assaulted women before and after they killed them. They brutally molested young boys and kids and families, full families. It's not just killing, it was actually Holocaust. And we want to make sure that people will feel in Israel this is maybe the only place that you'll feel safe.
What role will you play in that as a reservist? Because I was imagine when you came back and you were reunited with your children after filming that final farewell, I mean, that must have been quite a moment. And then you face perhaps going into battle.
Yeah.
And obviously that comes with huge risk.
Yeah. I had a lot of small miracles. I was actually got shot in the chest. I wore a bulletproof vest that I took from a wounded soldier. It saved my life from a very close range. For me, it's a miracle to be here. And you know, when you're facing death in such close contact, you get to think a lot. For me, Israel is the only place. It's the only place that is actually safe for Jewish people. And I will do anything in my power that Israel will remain that country. And when I came back home and met my children, I gave them a huge hug. I felt that I earned. God gave me a blessing that day. And on the very next day, not day, even few hours, I got back to the army. I'm a company leader. I have around 80 soldiers that I command, and straight for almost 2 months of reserves. That's what we do.
That's life now. Nimrod, thank you very much for coming in and telling us your quite astonishing story. And what else can I say but try and stay safe?
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, coming up, we're going to be discussing with former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, Andrew Bailey's comments about the economy. Are they helpful, or is it just more doomsaying for Britain? Stay tuned for that next.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's on your teeth. It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, Welcome back to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey. Let's get on to the British economy now and Andrew Bailey's comments about Britain's growth outlook. According to the Governor of the Bank of England, it's the worst I've seen, he said in an interview with the Chronicle in Newcastle. He said, and I quote, "If you look at what I call the potential growth rates of the economy, there's no doubt it's lower than it has been for much of my working life. It does concern me that the supply side of the economy has slowed. It does concern me a lot," he said, for good measure. When asked about the interest rates, Mr Bailey said they were unlikely to be cut for the foreseeable future, as he warned that the next stage of cutting inflation would be, quotes, hard work. Just to remind you that inflation has fallen from a peak of 11.1% in October 2022 to 4.6% last month. And that's on the back, of course, of a drop in the energy price cap. So is Mr Bailey being too negative? This is the Governor of the Bank of England, who should surely be talking the economy up. It's in the same week, of course, let's not forget, that we had this global summit at Hampton Court Palace, which the Prime Minister spoke at. And there, JP Morgan boss Jamie Dimon said the UK was doing great and added that he would take notes to show the White House. And fellow Wall Street heavyweight Steve Schwarzman, the boss of investment giant Blackstone, hailed the UK's real achievement in halving inflation and steering away from the subsidy-heavy approach of President Biden's administration. So the question I'm asking you is Andrew Bailey being too negative? I'd like to know your thoughts. Do get in touch. You can email me at farage@gbnews.com or tweet hashtag Farage on GB News. Now, let's bring Kwasi Kwarteng into the conversation, the Conservative MP for Speltbourne and also, of course, former Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'll ask you the question, Kwasi, that I'm asking the audience tonight. Is Andrew Bailey being far too negative?
Well, I think he is being quite gloomy. But, of course, he's speaking very honestly. And I have to say about Andrew that I had dealings with him when I was Energy Minister, Energy Secretary of State, and as Chancellor. And I'm actually someone who is a bit of a fan of Andrew. I think he's a very fair guy, but I think he's gone slightly outside of his lane, commenting on what he thinks is going to happen to the British economy. Because, of course, last year he said we were going to be in recession this year, and we weren't.
Yes.
And I don't think he should be a cheerleader. I mean, you said that he should be talking things up. I don't think the governor's job is to be necessarily a cheerleader, but at the same time, he shouldn't really be, casting gloom on our prospects.
Would you say it's unhelpful, Kwasi?
Yeah, I think it is unhelpful. But on the other hand, he's a very honest guy. He's someone I have a lot of time for. He's got a very difficult job. He's been under a lot of pressure. Obviously, we had our relationship broken last year, as it were. But I think it's having been in a similar sort of role, it is a difficult job. But you're right to say that he shouldn't be talking down the British economy.
I mean, I am intrigued by your support for him because, let's be honest, he wasn't Boris Johnson's first pick for governor. Boris Johnson preferred Gerard Lyons, who indeed had quite close links, I believe, to Liz Truss and indeed you. So
that's right.
Why wasn't Bailey Johnson's pick?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor that appointed him, and it is the gift of the Chancellor. But that's happened, and we've got to work with the officials that we have. So I take a balanced view. I think he's a capable guy. He's well popular within the bank, but at the same time, he shouldn't really be essentially talking down the British economy. And I think his remarks this week were in that line.
Look, you copped a lot of flack, didn't you, because of the mini-budget imploding and the markets didn't like it and reacted badly. Yeah, sure. But do you believe that the Bank of England has taken enough responsibility for what has happened to the British economy? Obviously, you can look back to the days of Mark Carney, who kept on blaming Brexit for everything.
That's right.
Actually, he should have taken responsibility for historically low levels of interest after the global financial crash and also huge amounts of quantitative easing, which didn't help the economy at all in the long run, did it?
So, look, I think there's an issue with the bank not having any real political accountability. And it does, as you say, have huge amounts of power. I mean, it's quite right that they should be impartial, if you like. They should be officials that get on with their job. But the problem with all of that is that given the powers they exercise, there's very little sort of democratic oversight, even scrutiny of what they do. And in a way, that's the Chancellor of the Exchequer's job. But it is difficult when the governor's saying, he doesn't think the British economy's prospects are very good. That makes the politician's job that much harder.
I wondered what your reaction was to this pay deal with NHS consultants, around 9%. We've also seen in the autumn statement that the national living wage is going to go up. Won't both of these measures fuel inflation?
Well, I think it's a broader point than that. I mean, I think inflation is probably going to be difficult, as the governor said, to deal with, because you've got, more shocks in the system. I mean, oil prices have gone up partly because of the Hamas attack in Israel that you were talking about, appalling terrorist attack. There's a lot of geopolitical volatility, uncertainty. And I think the governor was right to say that the fight against inflation is difficult. But at the same time, I think that, we should be very focused on what is going well with the British economy. I think the investment summit has gone well. I think clearly, this nonsense that Brexit's been a disaster. We're growing, as the Chancellor pointed out, faster than Italy, France, and Germany. So how you can say that Brexit has been a bad thing when the three biggest economies in Europe are facing recession and doing worse than us seems completely absurd.
I thought I would ask you as well, actually, about some of the debate that's currently taking place about immigration. And obviously, on one side of the argument, there's this argument that if you bring more people in, then there are more people working and therefore the more people paying tax, and it kind of grows the British economy. But on the other hand, of course, we are seeing huge pressure on our public services. I think there was a report out in the week suggesting that we'd have to build 500,000 homes a year just to keep pace with the numbers coming in. You'll be familiar with that 745,000 figure that was released by the Office for National Statistics last week. That was covering legal migration to the end of December 2022. Is immigration good for the economy or not?
I think it's got to be an immigration that works for the UK. And that's why, personally, I've always found a points-based system attractive. You've got to limit the numbers, and also you've got to have some control of the abilities, the quality of the people coming into your country so that you can benefit from that. I think the numbers and the people that they kind of what they bring to the table, I think it needs to be examined. Clearly, the numbers are way in excess of anything that we've stood for, in a general election on, and we need to have more control over that. And even the Prime Minister himself, Rishi Sunak, everyone in the government seems to be concerned about the scale of that immigration.
Although the government doesn't seem to be a nest of singing birds. We've had some conflict between Robert Jenrick and indeed James Cleverly, Home Secretary and his immigration minister. James Cleverly is saying that this Rwanda plan isn't the be-all and end-all when it comes to cutting illegal immigration. There's also the Prime Minister on one hand talking about handing out student visas, meanwhile concerned that students are bringing in too many dependents. There's also been this row between Suella Braverman and the Prime Minister about whether to put a 40 grand cap on people coming in as skilled workers. Would you advocate a cap, Kwasi?
So look, I think a cap and also some sort of point system does make sense. I know Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman well, and I think their general approach was a good one. And I'm not privy to the disagreements they've had with either James Cleverly or if that be the case with Rishi Sunak. I mean, clearly Suella had been in the department for a year, Priti Patel before that. Robert Jenrick's been there for a while as well and has got experience. And I think his approach was probably a good one.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Well, as ever, we're going to have an update on Nigel in the jungle from Bin Leo, who is out on the Gold Coast as we speak. I did set him a challenge yesterday in that I suggested he might want to drink a pint of something indescribable in honour of Mr. Farage. Let's see how he got on with that challenge. Stay tuned, that'll be up next.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey. Earlier on the show, I asked you whether you thought the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey was being too negative about the British economy, talking it down. This is what you've got to say. Robert says, Andrew Bailey is another Bank of England boss who is not up to the job. Who could you be referring to? Must be Mark Carney, perhaps, who blamed everything on Brexit and not on his own measures. Another viewer says Andrew Bailey has been installed to talk down the British economy as much as possible. He's clearly out of his depth in the role and starting raising interest rates too late and too slowly. Peter says Andrew Bailey is incompetent. Every job he's had, he's failed in. And Andrew says Andrew Bailey is a Remainer and crashing the British economy so he can make the UK look bad after leaving the EU. I don't know if he wants to crash the British economy. That would probably be a bit harsh, not least because it would reflect badly on him. But you may be pointing to something with a degree of Remain-leaning people in the Bank of England, certainly. Thank you. Keep your views coming in on that. Let's go to the Gold Coast now, because Ben Leo, GB News reporter extraordinaire, has got the latest from Nigel in the jungle. Now, Ben, we did speak about the fact yesterday that I felt as if the esteemed host of this show was being rather edited out of some of the footage. I mean, we barely saw him on last night's episode. There's this incident where we believe he told a really great anecdote about Donald Trump, as is his wont, because obviously they know each other quite well. One would expect that to be played because actually there probably aren't better stories than talking about one's relationship with a former US president, particularly when it's Trump, and yet none of it's seen the light of day. What do we think's going on, Ben?
Yeah, that's right. So like you and everyone else at home, I watched last night's episode and was dismayed at the fact he had about 40 seconds, Nigel, had about 40 seconds airtime. He woke up in the jungle and said how beautiful it was, and that was it for the rest of the show. That made me really push forward with something that I discovered a couple of days ago. I have good sources from inside the I'm a Celeb camp who told me that Nigel had quite an interesting conversation about his good friend Donald Trump, about how he helped him on the election trail, how he was a great guy and he was a good friend, and all the campmates were very interested in it. ITV never played that conversation, they never broadcast it, and after seeing that episode last night where Nigel was pretty much airbrushed out the entire episode, I really sort of pushed ahead with it and went to ITV and said, guys, what is going on here? You've not played this interesting conversation about Trump that the campmates were quite keen to listen to. And you would have thought, Trump being one of the most controversial, divisive, popular people in the world, they could have spared 20 or 30 seconds to include that in an episode of the show. They didn't, and all it's done is fuel these rumours and these growing concerns that ITV are deliberately censoring Farage now and starving him of airtime because they want him out the jungle. The theories are that they put Nigel in there to kind of discredit him and get him to make a fool of himself. He's had a few arguments about Brexit, about immigration, which arguably I think he's come out looking better for. He's shown that you can discuss these issues without being toxic or tribal, and you can have a good, honest debate. And I honestly believe now that ITV thought they were going to dunk on Nigel and make him look stupid and really discredit him in the eyes of the public. It hasn't worked, and now we're learning and understanding that he's being censored for airtime because, assumably, reportedly, they want him out of the jungle. So it is worrying. And also, I'll just add as well, I went to ITV with the revelations that I found about the Trump conversation, which no one else had. It was something I got exclusively. They ignored me and never got back to me. And only when I broke the story on Patrick did they then give comments to The Sun and The Mail and The Mirror, and they've still not spoken to me. I knew the story was true. I didn't need their response. I didn't need their confirmation. But just out of courtesy, ITV could have got back to me, and they didn't. So there seems to be an agenda at play against GB News and against Nigel, and it's quite concerning.
It is concerning. The only kind of counter-narrative I can think of, though, is it would be strange for them to want to dump him out of the jungle when they've reportedly paid him so much money to be in there. And I mean, I did notice the story on the Mail Online sort of suggesting that there were ideological forces that might be opposed to his stance on Brexit and other policy areas that are kind of influencing the production process. And there are people there that just don't like him and don't want him to get their airtime. Maybe after he also said he wanted to do the trials because he would be on television more. I don't know if there's anything in that, Ben.
Well, that story on the Mail Online and also on The Sun, that was a follow of our GB News exclusive. That was my story. They've elaborated on it slightly with some insider quotes from the show saying that they fear there's dirty tricks at play. But as you said, there's a theory that the show is full of lefty producers, and yes, they did pay him a rumoured £1.5 million to get him on, but as I mentioned, this growing theory is that they got him on the show to discredit him, to really smash his reputation during a time where it's highly thought that Nigel is at some point going to get back into politics. If and when the Tories are wiped out at the next election by Labour, Nigel is rumoured to be cozying back up with the Tories. He was, of course, at the Tory conference for the first time in decades in October, and also he's got links to reform as well. So he is, at some point, I think, going to get back into politics. He's made no secret of the fact that he's using I'm a Celebrity to touch base with these 10 million viewers who he thinks wouldn't have given him a chance before. So I think, and I'm going to just put this out there now, that they got him on the show to discredit him, to tarnish his reputation, to make sure that he doesn't have a future in politics. It hasn't worked because he's come out as a genuinely nice person. He's not a racist, he's not a xenophobe, and now the tactic is to starve him of airtime, which colludes with the fact that I found out they are censoring very decent and interesting conversations about Donald Trump. Why would you omit that?
Curious, Ben. Now, tell me, I set you a challenge yesterday. I wanted you to do a drinking or an eating challenge, or both. How did you get on?
OK, well, let me explain to you what's happened. With that story, it's been a very busy 24 hours. I did get in contact with a lot of places, bug farms, where they produce crickets and cockroaches and whatever else. They said, we're not going to help you because it trivialises eating bugs. We think bugs are the future. We want you to stop eating meat. Bugs are a serious conception. This is the future of humanity. So I went to, if you excuse me 1 second, let me grab this box. I went to a local pet shop.
Oh, God.
And got hold of some crickets, which normally are for pet reptiles and lizards and whatever else. I was going to eat one of these this morning on air. However, Camilla, I teased the fact I was doing this on breakfast this morning, and a couple of viewers, quite rightly, have said you shouldn't be eating live crickets or live animals on air. You need to make sure they're dead, and these are live. So, in the interests of not getting Ofcomed and of animal safety and well-being, I'm not going to eat these, but what I will do is I'll set these bad boys free back into the world so they have a full and enjoying great life, basically. That's what I wanted to say. So I'm not going to eat these. I will, however, Camilla, try and find something else for you in the coming days.
All right, Ben. I mean, it sounds like you're making quite a few excuses there, buddy. It wasn't a difficult challenge. We see Nigel down pints of indescribable things, but then I do get the sort of animal cruelty argument, and I wouldn't want us to be harming bugs or animals on air. So fair enough, but you have to still fulfill this challenge by the time I finish presenting this show this week, which is Thursday night. So off you go, back to the sunshine. Keep on working hard, and we shall see you tomorrow night, Ben. Thank you.
See you soon. Thanks, Camilla.
See you soon. Well, there you have it. Is he going to find something to eat? Who knows? I mean, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but, you know, he's out there having a great time in Australia, so let's at least put him to the test. Now, let's have our Can You Believe It moment. I know it's meant to be called What the Farage, but I'm adopting it as my own because I'm here this week. So can you believe it? I couldn't believe this story, which we covered in the Telegraph. Pub landlord Glenn Sutherland has resorted to shuttling thirsty punters to his pub's doorstep after a bus strike left his bar almost completely empty. So this is this guy who, let's be honest, has had an absolute nightmare during COVID. The pubs are closed, his takings are down, it's costing him thousands and thousands of pounds. He then is struck by industrial action by Go North East. 1,300 workers have gone on strike since the end of October. That means that nobody can get to his pub. So this landlord, Glenn, who I think we should give some sort of award to, frankly, camera if you're watching, reward this man. He's at the Market Tavern in Chester Street in County Durham. He's been offering his punters a lift to the pub. Some of them live 5 miles away, some of them are elderly, a lot of them are lonely, and coming to the pub breaks up what is a difficult week with being convivial with others and socialising and just enjoying a pint. So good old Glenn Sutherland, we give him a round of applause from the Farage show and say this to these striking workers: what are you doing? You know, we've got a loneliness epidemic going on at the moment. There's that wonderful advert that's gone viral in Ireland talking about that guy who's been widowed and he goes to the pub and a couple come and befriend him and his dog and they have a pint together. That's what it's all about. I mean, pubs are facing a hard enough time as it is without these striking workers. So that's my Can You Believe It story. If you're anywhere near the Market Tavern in County Durham, go in, have a drink and say hi to Glenn. End of rant. Now, next up, we're going to again be discussing Endgame, Omid Scobie's book. I'm named in it, so is my next guest, Dickie Arbiter, so there's lots to discuss. Stay tuned for that. Be back in just a jiffy.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion.
Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey. Now let's get on to Endgame. The book by Omid Scobie has hit the bookshelves. I'm in it. Why don't I just tell you what he says about me? It talks about the fact that I wrote this piece about, you know, the dog bowl incident where William grabs Harry and they have a fight, and I think he's got him by the lapels, and then he pushes him to the ground, and then quite amusingly he sort of says, don't tell Meghan, don't tell Meghan what's happened. You know, I basically sort of wrote a piece saying, actually, I felt that that demonstrated William's desperate love for his little brother and this idea that he felt he was losing him to Meghan, and he was sort of so irate about it all that he obviously resorted to violence, which wasn't a good thing. Anyway, Scobie, bless his heart, he's described me as the Telegraph's royal editor. I've never been the Telegraph's royal editor. I'm the associate editor. Facts matter. And he says, this was me apparently bizarrely sounding like the excuses of domestic abusers everywhere. Domestic abusers? Has Omid Scobie understood the notion of sibling rivalry? I've got 2 older brothers. They were at each other's throats the whole time. I think I was in several headlocks back in the 80s and 90s. It's not a domestic abuse case, is it? Anyway, there's that. I'm going to bring Dickie Arbiter into the conversation now, former press secretary to Queen Elizabeth II. Dickie, you're in the book as well. Are you trashed, or what's said about you?
I can't remember. I skipped over it so quickly.
Forget that. I tell you what, there's another thing in the book about the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, formerly known as the Earl and Countess of Wessex. And it says that an interview took place where they were asked about the Oprah interview, and they said, Oprah who? And he said this was an example of their bigotry. Can I just say, I did that interview with the Earl and Countess of Wessex, as they were then known. That's Sophie and Edward, to the uninitiated. And what they were saying was, I was trying to obviously get a newsline out of them. What do you think of Oprah? And they kind of went, Oprah who? As in, you know, we can't really mention her name because it's all very sensitive. So again, that's taken out of context. Interestingly, you know, the only person at the royal wedding that didn't recognise Oprah, do you know who that was, Dickie?
Probably the King.
Not the King. It was actually the Archbishop of Canterbury. Apparently, he had a 20-minute conversation with Oprah and then left
and hadn't got a clue
the
who she
wedding
was.
and said to his staff at Lambeth Palace afterwards, I had this conversation with this extraordinary woman who seems to be big in America on telly. And they were like, was it Oprah? He was like, oh, that's who it was. Anyway, the point is, I had Tom Bower on the show yesterday, Dickie, and we talked about, you know, Scobie's sources and motivations and all the rest of it. I mean, who do you think his sources are?
God.
Right.
somebody up there.
Yes.
You know, sources is always very easy to put down in a book because it means that you're safe, you're playing safe.
Yes.
There's some breaking news on this, you know that.
Yeah, go on then, yes. Something's happened in Holland, this book.
It's in Holland, yes. They've had to pulp the publication there because it names whoever was the royal that talked of Archie's skin colour.
Right.
Now, I'm a bit confused because there's sort of talk, was it a royal or was it somebody in the royal household?
Or was it royals, plural? Because Omid's been giving these interviews saying, oh, well, I know who they are, but I haven't put them in the book.
Yeah, well,
then Tom Bauer said he had put them in the book. We're not going to mention any names here because, you know, I think legally it's probably unsound to do so. Also, as is ever the case with these books, Finding Freedom and now this, there's no right of reply to the royal family.
None whatsoever, and I think he's done this book because after Finding Freedom, published in 2020, the barrier was down at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace. He wasn't getting any entry there and getting anything out of them, and therefore he had to find another source of income.
What do you make of the criticisms of the Princess of Wales? I mean, you've been up close and personal with royalty for a long time, Dickie. You know, she's depicted as this kind of Stepford wife, ornament, to be seen and not heard. It seems pretty unfair.
It's very unfair. He seems to be trashing the King, Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales. They are his bête noire, and he's having a go at everything that they do, that they are allegedly the future of the monarchy, but unless they change their ways, there isn't going to be a monarchy. So he's actually trashing the monarchy. He's trashing the organisation that made him very lucrative living.
Yes. Although, does he have a point on the monarchy needing to modernise and adapt? I mean, to be fair, your former boss, the late Queen, was very, very good at being ahead of the curve. She wanted to innovate and make sure that they were forward-thinking. We have had, I mean, a huge amount of negative publicity about this institution since Megxit in 2020. Does he raise a point about, particularly in light of, for instance, William and Kate's Caribbean tour, that actually the royals can't do this thing that the late Queen did of never complain, never explain?
No, they've got to say something. Now, it's unfortunate in the Caribbean there were errors made, and errors made by the people on the ground in the Caribbean and the people on the ground at Kensington Palace. They should have looked at the optics. It's not rocket science. You look at something, you've got youngsters behind a fence that's about that high, that's not very high. In my day, we would have said, no, you bring them in front.
Yes.
You might do it for a football match. This is not a football match. The other optic that was bad was using a Land Rover that had been used by the Queen and Prince Philip.
And you had the couple on the back of it, and it
all looked so
It would have been
colonial.
better, actually. I think it was the President of Jamaica and his wife, or the Prime Minister of Jamaica, because I haven't gone Republic yet. That's Barbados. And I suggested in a column, you know, have the Prince and Princess of Wales driving.
And the President on the back.
Exactly, because it would have looked a lot better.
Yes.
Let's also talk about the royal reaction to this, because they have just opted for a dignified silence. Keep calm, carry on. It's kind of the epitome of the slogan on the tea towels. Is that the right approach? I mean, would it be beneficial for William and Kate to do some kind of sit down and discuss all this, or is that the way that madness ends?
Let's go back to Margaret Thatcher.
Yes.
When she was having a go at the media and all that publicity for the IRA, she said, do not give them the oxygen of publicity. And the same applies to this. What do you say? Look, I've only read probably a third of the book. I've been working today, so I've been snatching time between. And this third of the book is rehashing stuff that has appeared in newspapers over the past 15 years.
Although that is the stuff of royal legend, Dickie, what's the old expression? It ain't old till it's told.
It ain't old till it's told, but it's been told time and time again. There is nothing new so far.
All right, we'll clear up one thing that's been retold. Does the King have his shoelaces ironed?
No. And does he have his toothpaste squeezed? Look, that story emanated when he broke his arm in 3 places.
Yes.
His arm was in a sling like this.
Yeah.
He couldn't squeeze toothpaste.
Yes.
I had my arm in a sling a few years later because I had an operation on my shoulder. I couldn't squeeze. I had to get my wife to squeeze it for me.
Fair enough.
So, come on, you know, let's this story go away.
But then there was the kind of, I think it was Jeremy Paxman that wrote in his book about having a collection of eggs boiled and then he'd choose one to his liking. I mean, is this a demanding and difficult man,
I have
as
had
Omid
breakfast
suggests?
with him.
Right.
And no, it doesn't happen. If I want an egg 4 minutes, I'm going to sit there with a stopwatch and make sure it's 4 minutes.
I know,
and
but
get
we
it
don't
out.
think the king is boiling his own eggs, let's be perfectly honest. But OK, I take your point. Also, what about William? He's described by Scobie as being hot-headed, of briefing against his brother to improve his own publicity. Do we believe all that?
No, would you? He would say that, wouldn't he? He's got a beef against the Prince of Wales. He's got a beef against the king, and he's going to say anything in order to make the point that they are not very nice people, and unless they change, we're not going to have a monarchy.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. That's what it's all about. Change, otherwise the monarchy is history.
Would it be good PR for the King and the Prince of Wales, finally, Dickie, to make up with Harry and Meghan? I mean, to take the moral high ground. I know that's really difficult, but we did hear some reports about a Christmas invitation that either was sent or wasn't sent and all the rest of it. It looked as if there was some hope for reconciliation. You know, if the King and Prince William rise above, from a PR perspective, doesn't that make them look stronger?
I'm going to answer a question with a question.
Go on.
You're a parent, and your child has done what Harry's done. What would your reaction be?
I mean, I wouldn't be happy about it. And I think this whole idea of sort of trashing your own family is
Trashing your
appalling.
family in Oprah, trashing 6 hours on Netflix, a book that sold countless thousands.
Yeah.
Come on.
I know, but you might look at him and think, look, he's damaged, he's got a huge amount of baggage left over from his mother's very tragic death. He's confused. You know, he's married a woman that doesn't really want to be in the UK or have any more ties to the royals. Therefore, they might pity him a little.
But if you give too much, how much of it is going to stay private? How much is going to end up in the media?
Well, probably a lot more to come, Dickie, I'd imagine. I mean, it keeps us in clover, but at the same time, not good for the royals. Dickie Arbiter, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Now, I think we have a bit of breaking news. Let's see what this is. Now, Nigel Farage, who would be in this chair were he not in the jungle, has won a press award. He's won Campaign of the Year at the Pagefield Press Awards for his campaign against debanking earlier this year. So congratulations to Nigel. Hopefully you'll be able to catch up with this at some point in the near future. Let's bring Jacob Rees-Mogg into the conversation now. State of the nation to come momentarily. Jacob, what have you got
What
planned?
are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about, in part, Michael Gove's admission that the coronavirus may have been man-made, and if it was man-made, came from the laboratory in Wuhan, which people like Matthew Ridley, very serious scientific figure, have been arguing is a possibility.
Yes.
And it's fascinating because this was something that was one of the Lunar Tune conspiracy theories to begin with, and gradually the evidence seems to be coming out to indicate that it may well have been a leak from a Chinese lab.
Astonishing. And also, I thought the inquiry's reaction to that. We can't speak about this here.
The inquiry is ridiculous. It seems set on deciding that they should lock down earlier and more aggressively,
Yes.
and don't care about anything else. And any evidence that doesn't relate to that, they're not fussed about. Whereas where it started is fundamental, surely.
Of course it is. And we must answer that question. Jacob, looking forward to
Thank you.
hearing that. Thank you for being with me this evening. As I said, I'm here all week. I'm back tomorrow at 7. Up next, as we just discussed, is Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The cold weather continues. Quite a few of us having a frosty start tomorrow morning, and for some there'll be some sleet and snow around as well. This area of low pressure just edging down through the North Sea, bringing some gusty winds, but also bringing more showers to northern Scotland and down the eastern side into northeast England, southeast Scotland. 1 or 2 sleet and snow showers may produce a covering through the night, and it could turn icy as temperatures plummet. A few rain showers scattered over the Midlands, Wales, southwest England. A bit more cloud here may just prevent a frost, but really from the Midlands northwards, many areas will be below freezing, rural spots well below freezing, and hence why it could be icy still. Well, we've got these showers coming in tomorrow over northern, northeastern Scotland, southeast Scotland, northeast England. Again, some sleet and snow is likely for a time. The cloud in the south should tend to break up, and so for many it'll be a day of sparkling sunshine, but it will be a cold feeling day. 2 or 3 for many across the north, maybe 5, 6 or 7, and perhaps a little higher in the far southwest. Milder air nudging back in here on Thursday, bringing some wet weather, damp and drizzly. The possibility of some sleet and snow, mostly over the moors in the southwest. Further wintry showers in parts of the east. Again, it could be icy first thing in the morning. But again, for many, it's a dry and a bright day, but it will again be on the cold side with temperatures mostly around 3 or 4 Celsius.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Michael Gove has let the cat out of the bag, and it's quite a big cat, at the COVID inquiry, when he suggests the virus could have been man-made. But the inquiry doesn't care. This comes after suggestions of a cover-up in the US earlier this year, owing to the relationships between Western virologists and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Meanwhile, controversy is unfolding at the Telegraph and Spectator as an Abu Dhabi-backed investment fund headed by Sultan Al Jaber, the COP28 president designate, among other government roles, wants to acquire the 2 great journalistic institutions. But does this pose conflicting interests for the press? Well, 2 of our media veterans might just have the answer. As fresh school guidance states teachers won't have to use trans pupils' preferred pronouns, the UK is facing the prospect of being put on a UN naughty step, the UN blacklist, owing to trans lobby campaigners such as, yes, you guessed it, Stonewall. But if the UN is upset with us, surely we're doing something right. And our Prime Minister has snubbed the Greek Prime Minister in a row over a game of marbles, the Elgin marbles to be precise. We'll be discussing that shortly. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my particularly pugnacious panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie, and the author and journalist, Michael Crick. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's what we've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Well, the top stories from the GB Newsroom tonight. Within the last hour, 12 more Israeli hostages have been released. And for those of you watching on television, the hostages can be seen here, arriving at the Rafah border crossing and being handed to the International Red Cross. Israeli Defence Forces saying 10 Israelis and 2 Thai nationals, we understand, now on their way home to their families. That exchange, part of a commitment to the 5th day of a humanitarian truce with the Hamas terror group. We're also hearing that 30 Palestinian prisoners have been released. It's believed to be made up of 15 women and 15 under 18s. We also understand that a journalist is reportedly among the 30 Palestinians that are going to be released. Meanwhile, the US seems to have changed its approach slightly today, asking Israel to take greater care if there are any future strikes on Gaza. The White House saying civilians and vital infrastructure must be protected. Now, schools could be forced to stay open during strike action under tough new legislation planned by the government. The Education Secretary today said strikes over the last year were some of the most disruptive on record for pupils. Teaching unions have described the plans for minimum service levels, as they're called, as shameful. But Gillian Keegan says it's all about achieving a fair balance. A man has admitted killing 3 people who died in separate attacks in Nottingham earlier this year. Students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, both 19 years old, and 65-year-old caretaker Ian Coates died after being stabbed in June. Valdo Calocane, who is also known as Adam Mendes, denied murder but admitted 3 counts of manslaughter on the basis of his diminished responsibility. Thousands attended vigils for the victims in Nottingham in the wake of those attacks. Now, rates of shoplifting are on the rise, with the sharpest increase seen in Conservative constituencies. In 2014, the party changed the law to classify the theft of items under £200 as low-value shoplifting. That meant some police forces disregarded it as petty theft. Well, Shadow Policing Minister Alex Norris told GB News the government hasn't taken the matter seriously enough.
Again, it shows that the decision to cut police was a total disaster. But what we've seen now, as those police officers are being added back, is that they're often not in the right places. So we're hearing really concerning stories. We see that it tends to be areas with Conservative police and crime commissioners that have the highest rates, because there doesn't seem to be the same focus on this.
Meanwhile, shop price inflation has eased for the 6th month in a row as retailers compete fiercely for customers ahead of Christmas. According to the British Retail Consortium, shop prices were 4.3% higher than last November. That's down from October and the lowest inflation rate since June. Food inflation overall also slowed to 7.8% from October. That's the 7th consecutive drop because of lower energy prices feeding into lower costs, particularly for dairy products. Now, if you're getting ready for Christmas and possibly putting up your tree this weekend, tonight you might just get the weather to go along with it. The Met Office is predicting snow in parts of the UK as we head into the start of the new month of December. There's a yellow weather warning in place right now for snow and icy conditions, and it's thought that'll create hazardous driving conditions, particularly in the northeast of England, Yorkshire and parts of Scotland, and that weather warning in place until late tomorrow morning. That's the news on GB News, across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
The Wuhan lab leak theory was once considered a Looney Tune idea, but now seems to be the most probable source of the virus. In March 2020, a group of scientists penned an open letter condemning the, quote, conspiracy theories, suggesting the virus's origin was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It emerged later one of its key signatories, Peter Daszak, was head of the EcoHealth Alliance, a research group that worked directly with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This was a clear conflict of interest. The then President, Donald Trump, later echoed claims of the Wuhan lab leak theory, and he was lambasted as a conspiracy theorist too, though he did sometimes give people that impression in other areas, so not unreasonably. Indeed, his own chief scientist, Anthony Fauci, undermined Trump, referring to a study consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. In February 2021, the World Health Organization suggested the lab leak theory was, quote, extremely unlikely, despite serious questions about the limited access permitted by the Chinese Communist Party for the investigation. It later emerged that American federal funding was provided to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for virus research. A dispute took place between Senator Rand Paul and Anthony Fauci over whether the funding could have been used to create COVID-like viruses. And now we know that 2 US agencies, the Department of Energy and the FBI, have concluded with some confidence that the virus originated in a lab. Indeed, as the likes of Matthew the Lord Ridley have pointed out, there were obvious components to the structural nature of the virus that were unusual and suggested some form of human intervention. The evidence clearly points to the likelihood that the virus came from a lab. In other words, the conspiracy theorists seem to have been on the right track. Earlier this year, the former US Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, said this to a US congressional committee when asked why government scientists were reluctant to entertain the idea of the lab leak.
I think the best evidence of that is their own conversations, which say that they didn't want unwarranted or unwanted, or they think the term was unwanted attention to the relationships that were taking place between Western virologists and those working within the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
So here we have the former Director of National Intelligence claiming the reason government scientists were keen to dispel suggestions of a lab leak was because of their own personal links to the lab in question. But these problems extend to the UK. Michael Gove gave credence to the idea this morning, but he was very quickly shut down.
There is a significant body of judgment that believes that the virus itself was man-made, and that presents a set of challenges as well.
Forms no part of the terms of reference of this inquiry, Mr. Gove, to address that somewhat divisive issue. So we're not going to go there.
But why not? Why wasn't the question of the lab leak theory included in the terms of reference of the inquiry? It's the foundational question. Yet this very expensive inquiry just wants to conclude that we ought to have locked down sooner and more brutally. Anything that does not fit in with its predetermined narrative is excluded, including the source of the virus. If we're to restore public trust in the post-COVID world, the question of the lab leak must be at the forefront of the COVID inquiry, and we must also ensure that lockdowns never happen again. As always, I want to hear from you, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm particularly pleased to be joined this evening by Professor Angus Dalgleish, oncologist at St George's University of London. Angus, thank you very much for coming in. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when the lab leak theory was first discussed, it was thought to be beyond the realms of possibility. It was thought to be by people who are hostile to China and believed in any conspiracy theory. But now increasing evidence has come forward for it being the case.
Well, it certainly has, but it's been very slow. And at the very beginning, I worked with colleagues in Norway, Børge Sørensen, with whom I've been working and developing an HIV vaccine, which actually the phase 2 trials were very, very good. And it was a unique way of going about making the vaccine completely the opposite of all the ones that had failed. So when the COVID sequence became available, he said, let's collaborate and form